Hi there, this is a Year 2 macroeconomics topic video looking at the concept of intra-industry trade. Many students will be familiar with international trade generally, trading goods and services across borders, and there is intra-regional trade that takes place within regions, for example, trading goods and services perhaps within the African economy. Intra-industry trade is slightly different, important distinction to make. So intra-industry trade means trade within industries. It's sometimes called two-way trade. Take a country like South Korea, for example. South Korea is pretty well developed. It's a rich nation now, very advanced economy, one of the most complex economies in the world, and it can both import and export similar products. Cars, for example, or printed circuits, refined petroleum products. So intra-industry trade is a measure of two-way trade between countries, essentially when nations import and export similar products. There is a measure of the scale or intensity of intra-industry trade. That's called the Grubel-Lloyd Index. But you've never heard of that before. The GL Index. So, for example, if a country only exports or imports a particular product, like a country exports sugar and doesn't import any sugar at all, or a country exports oil but doesn't import any oil, then the Grubel-Lloyd Index would be 0. No intra-industry trade. However, if a country imports exactly as much of product X as it exports, so for example, it's a very similar import and export of light vehicles, for example, or railway tracks, then the GL score would be 100. Now, the crucial thing is to think about developed economies, in particular those that have capabilities, a diversified economy, very high level of human capital, and those include, by the way, rapidly industrializing countries, including Malaysia, Thailand, China. Those types of countries tend to engage in more intra-industry trade, partly because they've got the capabilities to be able to supply commercially many products to market. Whereas resource-rich developing countries, less developed countries, perhaps lower and lower middle income countries, they tend to have relatively little intra-industry trade. They might be particularly good at one thing, but not necessarily at a wide range of products. Here's the Grubel-Lloyd Index for a selection of countries in 2011. Not much fundamental will have changed in the intervening period. You can see that Hong Kong and Singapore and countries like the United States have the highest intra-industry trade figures, 66, 65, 62 respectively. The European Union, there are now 28 countries, of course. Croatia came in 2013, had an index of 60. So developed countries tend to have quite high intra-industry scores, whereas I put in a couple of countries there, Zambia with a score of 17, and the Central African Republic with a score of 2. That is in fact the country with the lowest intra-industry trade score in the world. So why might intra-industry trade be on the increase overall, not necessarily every year, but taking the long-term view? Well, on the demand side, we as consumers, we like to have choice. If we're buying a new car, for example, it's good to be able to shop across markets, across national boundaries. We don't like too much choice, but we have a preference for having some choice, particularly if there's a sort of contestable market in place. We know from the demand side that tariffs have been coming down, so therefore the price of imported goods and services has been falling in many cases, increasing the real incomes of consumers. So for example, in the tourist industry, people like to take a holiday at home and a holiday overseas. And there are supply side explanations for the rise of intra-industry trade. So lots of businesses now taking advantage of economies of scale. They're vertically integrated, so they're sourcing components from different countries. The transportation costs of moving goods across borders has fallen, especially as a result of containerization. It's now very, very cheap to put, for example, very small micro cameras and smartwatches and things inside a container. You can transport smaller, very high value products very cheaply around the world. Countries generally more open to products from different nations, so you get ideas, spillovers, technology transfers that increases capabilities. And crucially, over time, you would hope that countries build up a stock of human capital, a stock of capability and experience, which allows them to produce a wider variety of both intermediate products, that things like component parts, and the final product, a finished car, for example. So that's been a little look at the concept of intra-industry trade.